Hi, my name is Wayne Gamillion, producer and founder of Urban Sound Station Television. This program is sponsored by Manhattan Investigations and Manhattan Adult Services. This year's Black History theme is We Are One. Although I'm not a peace officer by profession, it is an honor for me to join the Department of Probation in celebrating Black History Month 2014. And with this, I welcome you all to join the Manhattan Investigations Manhattan Adult Services in presenting its first annual Black History Month celebration, reflecting on our struggle and history as a people both in the U.S. and abroad. I think you'll find this program both insightful, educational, and intellectually stimulating. Enjoy.
So clearly, Black History Month was created to recognize the important contributions of so many Black Americans, whether born as a slave or as a free person, throughout 300 years of colonial times and of the new nation.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Okay, good day to all. Thank you very much for the invitation to address you today with regard to a few of the accomplishments of Nelson Mandela. I hope that everyone can hear me. We don't have a mic. Is my voice, does it have enough amplification? Thank you. All right. Okay, a lot of times, when people talk about Nelson Mandela, they talk about his childhood and so on and so forth, but they never really look at the achievements, some of his achievements. And the reason I'm here today is to try to put some of that in perspective. You cannot examine the achievements of Mandela on the national level unless you also look at his achievement on the international level. And this is one of the reasons why he became an international icon. Now, although they were always a minority population, white people ruled South Africa for many years and continued to rule after it became a republic in 1910. Now, the last president of South Africa was F.W. de Klerk, who ruled South Africa from 1989 to 1994. With the release of Nelson Mandela from prison on February 11, 1990, after 27 years of incarceration on trumped-up charges that included sabotage and terrorism, to name a few, both Mandela and de Klerk, together with much international pressure, brought the apartheid system of racial segregation to an end, and both Mandela and de Klerk negotiated the transition to majority rule without shedding blood. And in 1993, both Mandela and de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Those events, however, opened the way for Mandela to be elected President of the Republic of South Africa. Mandela served as president from 1994 to 1999. He served only one term in office. He did not want to continue. He did not want to stay in office, as many African leaders do for the rest of their lives. He wanted to make a smooth transition and to set a good example for the leaders of the future. That you have a democratic process, you have a parliamentary system, a constitution, adhere to it. And so he tried to set an example, as he always did. As president, one of Mandela's first initiatives was the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1996 and appointed Archbishop Desmond Tutu as its chairperson. Now, the objective of the commission was basically to investigate crimes committed under apartheid by both the former government and the ANC. The ANC meaning the African National Congress, which was the majority party for the black population of South Africa. All sides, however, agreed and the Commission granted individual amnesties in exchange for testimony of crimes committed during the apartheid era. It held 2 years of hearings detailing rape, torture, bombings, and assassinations before issuing its final report in October of 1998. Mandela praised the Commission for its work, stating, in essence, that it had helped us, quote, it had helped us to move away from the past and to concentrate on the present and the future. Now, as president, the Mandela administration inherited a country with a population of over 52 million people, 40 million of whom represented the black population. The Mandela administration also inherited a country with a huge disparity, in which wealth and services between the white and black communities was unevenly distributed. In his latest publication about politics and corruption in Africa, my Nigerian colleague, Mr. Morad Bamibadi, wrote in his book entitled Sneaky Greed that the 1% have always worked to prevent the 99% of the population from achieving economic self-sufficiency. This was not only true in South Africa, but throughout the world. As we see the constant conflict on a daily basis, whether it's in Ukraine or in the Middle East or in Venezuela, this is the problem. The haves against the have-nots, the rich against the poor. You know, there's no middle class. I refuse to believe that there's a middle class element, maybe once upon a time. But today, the lines of economic and social demarcation is quite explicitly defined. You either have or you don't have. And if you don't have, you have to fight for your human dignity, economically, socially, politically, and every other which way. Of a black population of 40 million, around 23 million lacked electricity or inadequate sanitation. 12 million lacked clean water supplies, 2 million children not in school, and 1/3 of the population of South Africa was illiterate, the black population. There was 33% unemployment, and just under 1% of the population lived below the poverty line. Now let us look, this is the kind of society that Mandela inherited. Now let us look at the achievements after one term in office. After one term in office, welfare spending increased to 13% in 1996, 1997, and 1998, and continued to increase in 1999, and that's when he left office. The government introduced parity in grants for communities, including child maintenance grants and old age pension, which previously had been set at different levels for South Africa's different racial groups. In 1994, free health care was introduced for children under 6 years of age and pregnant women. By the 1999 election, 3 million people were connected to telephone lines, 2 million people to electricity grid, 1.5 million children were brought into the educational system, 500 clinics were either upgraded or constructed for nearly 3 million people. I do not have the exact statistics as to how many jobs were created, but what I do know, however, was that the Skills Development Act of 1998 allowed for the vocational and technical training of the workplace. The Land Restitution Act of 1994 was a significant act which allowed the people of South Africa to regain control of arable lands that were stolen from them during the apartheid era. And laws were created in 1913 by the apartheid administration to make that possible. Nelson Mandela reversed that. Additionally, the Labor Relations Act of 1995 promoted workplace democracy, orderly collective bargaining, and effective resolution of labor disputes. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act of 1997 and the Employment Equity Act of 1998. That was passed basically to put an end to unfair discrimination and to ensure the implementation of affirmative action in the workplace. Just give me a couple more minutes and I will be through. Okay, I know time is of the essence. Now, the 1994 election of Nelson Mandela created the condition for the subsequent election of Thabo Mbeki on June 2nd, 1999, and the current president of the Republic of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, who was elected in 2009. Now, this is only on the domestic level. Now, let me look briefly at what he has accomplished on the international level. Mandela encouraged, on the international level, he encouraged other nations to resolve conflicts through diplomatic reconciliation and also initiated negotiations to end conflicts in African countries such as in Nigeria and the Congo. As well as outside of Africa, he also called for an African Renaissance and supported the political initiative calling for an independent Palestinian state. In September 1998, Mandela was appointed Secretary General of the Non-Aligned Movement. The Non-Aligned Movement was established in 1961. The Non-Aligned Movement was a movement of third world nations that supported the people who were struggling against colonization and neo-colonialism throughout the world. And this movement was established by people like Sukarno of Indonesia. It was established by people like Azikiwe from Nigeria, who became the first president of Nigeria in 1963, and Kwame Nkrumah. Most of you know Kwame Nkrumah as the world's most important Pan-Africanist thinker of all time when Ghana became independent in 1957. The movement also supported liberation movements, like the struggles that were being waged by the ANC in South Africa, the struggle in Mozambique by Samora Machel, and the struggle by Guinea-Bissau, by Amilcar Cabral, and also supported the maintenance and security of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. Now, Mandela has left a very important legacy. A very important legacy. He was never linked to corruption. He always lived an exemplary life. He served one term in office, and what he did was to create the condition for the continued development and transformation of South Africa, hoping that future leaders will continue to follow in his footsteps and put the interests of the people before the interests of themselves. And when that process is reversed, then the concept of reconciliation and so on will no longer be relevant, thereby affecting the dream of Nelson Mandela. But as long as they stay the course, I think the future of Africa and the world would be bright, because South Africa must exemplify the kind of example that we would like to see throughout the African continent and throughout the African diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of good tidbits there. Okay, we now have our very own Judge Padro, who's always been backing us up and who's always there for us. And we want to personally say thank you. Let's give him a hand clap and accolades. But before we call you Judge Padro, we would like our Assistant Commissioner Jane Mbenciani to give us an introduction of our Judge Padro.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to introduce our guest speaker, Justice Padro. Justice Padro and I have never met. How are you? I've only seen your name about 1 million times on every single paperwork that comes by my desk. Judge Padro was appointed a judge to civil court beginning in November 1993 under Mayor Dinkins. He then became appointed by election to Supreme Court in 2001. He's currently assigned, for those who don't know, to 2 specialized parts, the juvenile offender part and the Manhattan drug diversion part. Over the years, Judge Padro has become one of probation's friends. We go to Judge Padro for a lot. We do specialized reports for Judge Padro. But I think that Judge Padro, I'm so happy that he was invited as our guest speaker here today, because I know Judge Padro has a lot of wisdom and a lot of things that he would like to share with us. Let me introduce to you Justice Eduardo Padro.
So buenas tardes, or as we say in French, good afternoon. I am truly honored to be asked to address this gathering and this exciting celebration of Black History Month. I'm going to do a presentation on 3 parts. The first one is a little bit of history, the second part, the theme of We Are One, and then the third part, I'll close out with bringing it home. So in preparation for my remarks, I came across some information which some of you may already know, but which I and those that don't, I'm sure will find interesting. See, in 1915, almost 100 years ago, the state of Illinois sponsored a national celebration of the 50th anniversary of the end of slavery. A group of African Americans were so moved by the experience that they decided to create the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. That organization is now known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and the source of some of the historical information that I will share with you today. In 1926, members of this association, led by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, an author and historian, decided to establish Negro History Week. The week chosen encompassed the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln on the 12th and Frederick Douglass on the 14th. The reason being that after the president's assassination, many blacks and Republicans throughout the country had created a tradition of celebrating Lincoln's birthday. And since the late 1890s, black communities throughout the country had begun celebrating Douglass's birthday. So Woodson builds upon these 2 traditions and decides to create something hopefully even more impactful, which is to celebrate the enormous contributions of so many African Americans to the development of this nation, most of whom at that point were completely absent from the history books. So in 1926, some 87 years ago, Dr. Carter first proclaimed Negro History Week. So as we fast forward, by the late 1960s, the civil rights movement of the South was really playing second fiddle to the Black Power political movement and the Black is Beautiful cultural movement that had arisen throughout the North and in major urban centers throughout the rest of the country. I can remember growing up as a teenager in East Harlem, in El Barrio, and experiencing the political fervor and pride of that time as a new generation of young activist African Americans, influenced in large part by the nationalist and Pan-Africanist perspectives of individuals like Malcolm X and Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, and as was mentioned earlier, Kwame Nkrumah, and organizations like the Black Panthers and SNCC, which embraced with pride their blackness and with time, their African heritage, while committing at the same time to the struggle for political empowerment. Among many of these generation, many declared solidarity with what was being discussed by our prior speaker, which were the liberation struggles in Africa and with other revolutionary and social struggles throughout Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And as your speaker noted, back then the term used was the Third World. In the midst of this fervor, Negro History Week in most large urban centers had largely been transformed into Black History Month, and it would take the elected leaders of our nation another decade before President Ford in '76, some 37 years ago, would officially proclaim Black History Month. So I'm going to ask your indulgence for a moment as I sidetrack a little to share a very personal note on how all of this history impacted my own life. In 1964, the Harlem riots occurred, which was the first of the large-scale 1960 riots, which was later followed by what I am sure many of our younger colleagues here have probably studied in college, which was the Watts riots in 1965. But in '64, Uptown was an armed camp. Not too different from the pictures we have witnessed throughout the Arab Spring, or most recently in Thailand, Ukraine, or yesterday in Venezuela. As Harlem blows up, my guidance counselor reads an article in the Times about a gathering of some of the city's private and most selective schools that had decided to create scholarships as their way to make a difference in the lives of what we would then call underprivileged and culturally deprived minority kids. I was one of them. And the phrase inner city kids, that didn't even exist at that time. So our Jewish guidance counselor, working with our African American science teacher, identified the top students at my school, and a group of us applied to these schools. The 5 of us, 2 African Americans, 1 Virgin Islander, and 2 Puerto Ricans, traveled beyond East Harlem to study at these schools. I ended up at the Dalton School. So I was a direct beneficiary of these struggles. By the way, I was again to benefit from these social movements when I was part of the first generation of minority ghetto kids being admitted to Ivy League schools. You see, I ended up at Yale. Now, before the 1960s, the Daltons and Yales of our nation had always had a small number of students of color. But most, if truth be told, were the children of the elite from Africa, from Asia and Latin America, with once in a while an occasional child of a prominent American Black. So of what relevance is any of this history to today's celebration? Well, I believe it is important that we understand our history, because if we don't, then we run the risk of losing the heart and the soul of this important celebration. When I met with P.O. Bridgewater and P.O. Smith to find out the theme of the event, I was truly pleased to hear the response of "We are one," and that they were committed to structuring the event in a way that it would have meaning and not just be a party. Nothing wrong with a party, but we have to be clear. So let me now address the theme of "We are one." By the way, this year's National African American History Month's official theme is Civil Rights in America. But as I stated, the organizers felt compelled to celebrate "We are one." So clearly, Black History Month was created to recognize the important contributions of so many Black Americans, whether born as a slave or as a free person, throughout 300 years of colonial times and of the new nation. I can recall that as an elementary school student, Black faces were extremely rare in the official textbooks. Maybe of even greater import was the fact that outside of sports and music, Black faces were close to invisible. Allow me to share another story. The year was 1968. Martin Luther King had been murdered in April. Bobby Kennedy was killed in June. And as the new September TV lineup was announced, I can still recall the excitement that was generated when we learned that Diahann Carroll was going to have the lead role as Julia in a TV series playing the role of a nurse who was also a single black mom. Trust me when I tell you that at least in New York City, every black and Puerto Rican family was glued to their television set as this monumental event was about to take place. By the way, all of the rest of America reacted too, because Julia was one of the top 10 TV series watched that year. So from Julia in 68, let's flip the numbers, to Oprah in 86, or from King's assassination in 68, to Obama's election in 08. The progress has been nothing short of monumental. So this, and Chita also. The fellow Latinos are in the house. All right. So it is very important that we always remember that history and that we pay tribute to our African American brothers and sisters whose enslaved ancestors, as well as the much smaller percentage of ancestors that were free persons, that these ancestors were such an important part of this nation's development.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
I'm the son of a black man from Kenya and a white woman from Kansas. I am married to a black American who carries within her the blood of slaves and slave owners, an inheritance we pass on to our two precious daughters. I have brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, uncles, and cousins of every race and every hue scattered across 3 continents, and for as long as I live, I will never forget that in no other country on earth is my story even possible.